Just after 2 Friday morning in this parking lot off Franklin Road, Metro Police found this silver car sprayed with bullets. 35-year-old Eric Butler was shot. He was taken to the hospital and died shortly after getting there.
At 2:25 in the morning, on June 19, 2026, police got a call about a man down on the 200 block of South Franklin Road on Indianapolis's east side. When officers arrived, they found a 35-year-old man bleeding out on the pavement, his body riddled with gunshot wounds. They rushed him to Ashkenazi Hospital, but it was too late. He was gone. The Marion County Coroner's Office would later identify him as Eric D. Butler, but the streets of Indianapolis already knew exactly who he was. They called him Lil E. And here is the thing that makes this story hit different from every other rapper killed on the street story you have heard before. This man had almost made it out. Not once, not twice, but multiple times across a decade. It looked like the system was going to swallow him whole, or the streets were going to take him. And every single time, something pulled him back into the light. His music, his acquittals, his survival. Every single time, people around him said, maybe this time he'll make it. He didn't make it. And today, we are going to sit with that. We are going to talk about who Eric Butler really was, where he came from, what he was caught up in, and why this story should disturb you. Not just as a crime story, but as a human story. So if you are new here, welcome to The Last Witness. If this is your first time, please take a second right now and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. We do not do surface-level coverage here. We go deep. We go where others won't. This channel exists because somebody has to be the last witness to stories that would otherwise just disappear. So hit that bell. You're going to want to be here for what's coming. Now let's get into it. To understand Eric Butler, you have to understand Indianapolis's east side. Because that neighborhood did not just shape him. In many ways, it built him, broke him, and ultimately buried him. Indianapolis is a city that does not get a lot of national attention for its crime stories. People think of Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore. But Indianapolis has had its own war going on for years, and the East Side has been one of the most contested territories in that war. When you grow up on those streets, the options that get presented to you early in life are very different from what kids in the suburbs are seeing. The infrastructure of the street economy has been there for decades, and it pulls people in young, before they have the tools to see the long game. Eric Butler grew up in that environment. We do not have detailed accounts of his very early childhood from public records, but what the public record tells us, and tells us clearly, is that by the time he was a young man, he was deeply embedded in the street life of Indianapolis's East Side. And not just on the edges of it. He was connected at a high level to one of the most notorious criminal organizations the city had ever seen, the Grundy Crew. Now let's talk about the Grundy Crew, because you cannot tell Eric Butler's story without understanding this organization and what it meant in Indianapolis. The Grundy Crew was led by a man named Richard Grundy, and this operation was not small-time corner dealing. According to prosecutors, Richard Grundy ran a violent drug trafficking ring that stretched from Indianapolis all the way to Phoenix, Arizona. Law enforcement alleged that this organization was responsible for multiple murders, and when the full indictment came down, prosecutors charged Grundy with orchestrating 5 killings and running a marijuana distribution network that spanned multiple states. Eventually, Richard Grundy was convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison. That is the level of criminal enterprise we are talking about. And Eric Butler, according to law enforcement at the time, was not some foot soldier on the outside of that operation. Court records and law enforcement reporting show that he was a high-ranking member of the Grundy Crew. He was described by investigators as someone who had real authority within the organization's structure. He was someone the people around him listened to. He had a role. He had weight. Now here is where Eric's story starts getting complicated, because alongside that street life, this man had an entirely separate identity that he was building brick by brick. He was a rapper, and not just a rapper who dropped a couple of songs on SoundCloud. He was a genuine artist with a real following. A man who spent years building his name in the Indianapolis music scene until he had become one of the most recognizable figures in it. His stage name was Lil E, and under that name, he released music that connected with people. His biggest song, Hardly Breathe, pulled in over 9 million views on YouTube. Think about that number for a second. 9 million views. That is not a local underground artist scraping for streams. That is someone who broke through. He collaborated with Rio de Young OG on the album Professional Shit Talking in November 2019, a project that got real attention in hip-hop circles. By the end of his life, he had nearly 100,000 monthly listeners on Spotify and about 35,000 followers on Instagram. His music was on Apple Music. People across the country were listening to Lil E. And this is the thing that makes this so hard to sit with. He had the talent. He had the audience. He had the proof that people wanted to hear what he had to say. He named one of his albums, Eric Butler vs. The State of Indiana. Think about that title. Think about what that says about how he saw his own life, his own fight. He was naming his art after the battle he was living through every single day. The streets versus the music. The system versus the man. The past versus the future he was trying to build. He was trying to tell his own story before someone else told it for him. Now let's go back to 2015, because this is where the legal troubles that would follow Eric Butler for the rest of his life really began in a serious way. When the case against the Grundy crew dropped, Eric Butler was one of 11 people charged in connection with the conspiracy and racketeering indictment tied to Richard Grundy's operation. Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry made the announcement, and it was a big deal. Multiple defendants. Serious charges. The kind of case that can put people away for the rest of their lives. But here is the first twist in Eric's story, and it is a significant one. The criminal gang activity and drug case against him fell apart. By 2017, that major case, the racketeering and conspiracy charges tied to the Grundy operation, did not stick against Eric Butler. He was not convicted on those charges. The case came apart. Now, that does not mean he walked away clean from that era entirely. Court records show he later pleaded guilty to drug charges in 2018. So there was accountability, but not the kind that would have put him away for decades. He stayed in the city. He kept making music. He kept fighting. But the streets have a longer memory than any courtroom. Fast forward to September 2023, and this is where the story takes one of those moments that you genuinely cannot believe is real until you see the cameras rolling. Indiana State Police were conducting a drug investigation on the city's Near East Side. A confidential informant had been doing controlled drug buys at a house on East Washington Street. Between September 3rd and September 6th, the informant made multiple purchases of crack cocaine from the residence. Investigators watched the house. They saw the traffic pattern. People pulling up, going inside for just a few minutes, then leaving. That quick in, quick out flow that law enforcement says is textbook for a house that's running narcotics. ISP got their search warrant and moved in with SWAT around 6:20 in the evening. What happened next was caught on camera by Fox 59 and CBS 4 News crews who were at the scene. 14 people came out of the front and back of the duplex after numerous commands. But one person did not come out with the others. After several more minutes and multiple additional commands from officers, a man crawled out of an attic window. That man was Eric Butler. He climbed out of the attic window of a drug house, mid-raid, with news cameras rolling, and was taken into custody. When troopers reached him, he had $95 in his pocket, money that turned out to match the money the confidential informant had used to purchase cocaine from the location. He also had a key that opened the back door of the duplex. And around his neck, he was wearing a gold necklace that read, "Must obey bosses forever." Now, let's just sit with that image for a second. A man who had 9 million views on YouTube for his music. A man who had survived the collapse of a massive federal gang case. A man who was nearly 40 years old and had been doing this for 20 years. Crawling out of an attic window during a police raid while news cameras filmed him. The charges were serious: dealing cocaine, dealing in a narcotic drug, and unlawful possession of a firearm by a serious violent felon. If convicted, he was looking at serious time. But then came the second twist. In February 2025, a jury found Eric Butler not guilty on all 3 charges. Not guilty. He walked out of that courtroom a free man. Think about what that must have felt like. To be filmed crawling out of an attic window during a drug raid. To face those charges. To sit through that trial. And then to hear a jury say, not guilty. He had beaten the system again. He had 15 trips to the Marion County Jail on his record by this point. He had been dragged through the courts. He had been connected in the public record to one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises Indianapolis had ever seen. And still, the law could not make it stick in the way that would permanently remove him from the streets. He walked out. He kept making music. He had 35,000 people following his life on Instagram. And then, 2 months before he died, somebody shot him. In April 2026, Eric Butler was shot at an auto repair shop on East Washington Street, less than a mile from where he had been arrested in 2023, less than a mile from where he would eventually be killed. He survived that shooting. He was wounded, but he lived. That shooting was never solved. Nobody was charged. Nobody was arrested. The investigation remained open. And Reverend Charles Harrison with the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, a man who has spent years working to interrupt the cycle of violence on these streets, said something after that April shooting that sounds almost prophetic now. He said, "If you're going to stay out there in the streets and be involved in criminal activity, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to end up back in prison, or you're going to be the victim of violent crime." Eric Butler had just survived the first attempt on his life. 6 weeks later, he was dead. At 2:25 in the morning on June 19, 2026, shots were fired on South Franklin Road near Interstate 465. It was the same East Side neighborhood, less than a mile from the April shooting, less than a mile from the Washington Street house. It was the same world, the same geography, the same darkness. He was found on the pavement. He was taken to Ashkenazi Hospital. He did not survive. He was 35 years old. The investigation is still open. No suspect has been publicly identified. No arrest has been made. Just like the April shooting, the case sits open and unanswered. And here is something that makes the whole picture even heavier. In the weeks before Lil E was killed, Indianapolis had already been bleeding. Just weeks earlier, on May 5th, another Indianapolis rapper named Playboy the Great, a producer and rapper who had been signed to Boozy Badass's label, was murdered at his East Side apartment. Two rappers from the same city, the same side of town, within weeks of each other. The city's hip-hop community was reeling. People who knew Eric took to social media immediately after news of his death spread. The tributes poured in.
It's sad. It's my friend, you know what I mean? Like, it's, he's a legend in the city where, you know, you hope it's not real.
So let's sit with the psychological weight of this story, because I think this is where it really gets to you, if you let it. Here is a man who by every external measure had talent, had an audience, had a reason to step away from the life that kept threatening to consume him. He had 9 million views. He had nearly 100,000 monthly listeners. He had collaborations with known artists. He had the mic. He had the stage. And yet the streets kept pulling him back. Or maybe they never let go in the first place. Maybe that is the real question here, because there is a difference between a person who chooses the street life and a person who was born so deep inside it that there was never really a clean exit door. What does it do to a person, psychologically, to have grown up in an environment where the Grundy crew was not some distant threat, but a community? Where the people around you, the people you grew up with, the people you trusted, were the same people law enforcement was targeting? What does it do to your sense of identity when the system charges you, fails to convict you, charges you again, acquits you again, and the cycle just keeps spinning? What does it do to you when you survive one shooting, when you feel the bullets and somehow walk away, and you keep going? Do you feel invincible? Do you feel like you've been given a second chance and you don't know how to use it? Do you feel like the world around you is so locked in a pattern that there is no real way out, no matter what your Spotify numbers say? And here is the question that I keep coming back to, the one that I think deserves more than a news cycle's worth of attention. How many times does a community have to lose its artists, its loudest voices, the people who were actually documenting what life on those streets felt like, before something genuinely changes? Because Lil E was not just a criminal record. He was a document. His music was testimony. Hardly Breathe, Eric Butler versus the state of Indiana. These were not just song titles. They were dispatches from a life that most people will never understand unless someone puts it into a verse and lets it breathe. He did that. And now he's gone. Who speaks for the places that keep losing their voices? Who is paying attention to the pattern where the same streets, the same blocks, the same half-mile radius keeps claiming lives year after year, shooting after shooting, unsolved case after unsolved case? Eric Butler was not expendable. He was a father, a son, a brother, a friend, and a man with a voice that hundreds of thousands of people chose to listen to. He was complicated, deeply, genuinely complicated, in the way that real people are complicated, not in the sanitized way we sometimes talk about victims in true crime stories. He made choices that put him in danger. He also made music that made people feel seen. Both of those things are true at the same time. And maybe the hardest part of this story is that nobody really knows what was in his head in those final weeks. Did he know someone was coming for him? Did he think he had enough street credibility to protect himself? Did he think his acquittal had closed a chapter? Did he have any idea that the person or people who came for him in April would come back in June to finish it? We don't know. The investigation is open. His killer is still out there. And maybe that is the most unsettling part of all. The story is not over. The ending has not been written yet, because justice has not been delivered. And until it is, Eric Butler's name is just one more entry in a long list of Indianapolis homicides that never got answered. If this story stayed with you, and honestly, if it didn't, I would be surprised, then do this one thing. Share this video with someone. Not for our numbers, though yes. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story on The Last Witness. But share it because this story deserves to be heard outside of a crime blotter. Share it because Eric Butler deserves more than a 2-paragraph news article. Share it because somewhere out there, somebody knows something about what happened on South Franklin Road in the early hours of June 19, 2026, and if enough people are paying attention, maybe that person decides to come forward. The last witness is always the one who speaks up when everyone else goes quiet. We are the last witness, and we are not done talking about this.